Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to our program on Share TV and the Islamic Share Council of Southern California. We always have a program on Fridays, which is called the Friday Community Event. And today we have with us Sheikh Tariq Atta. We want to thank you for being here, Sheikh Tariq.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
So this week, I mean, with our political climate and what's taking place in our society, as we know, there's a lot of difficulties or challenges that are going or that are taking place with our current climate when it comes to. We want to thank you with racial profiling and challenges that we see. And last week, what we did was we had Imam Abdul Hafiz, Ustad al-Lubna, and Sheikh Imam Jihad Safir come in and talk about systematic racism here in the U.S. or nationwide, right? And then today we have Imam Tariq Atta, who will go ahead and talk about Tawhid and social reform. But before we do that, I also wanted to share with you, Sheikh, just maybe some of personal experience and not just that, but also my educational background in behavioral health and working in LA. I'm originally from LA. I've spent 20 years of my life in LA. And I've worked with, veterans there, worked with, the homeless population, with the African American and the Black community, right? Life isn't easy for them. It's a difficult lifestyle that they have, and and how things fall into it. It's a systematic problem, which even yesterday in my class we were talking about how there's a systemic problem, right? We can always get rid of people, right, in a job, but the main thing is to change the system. That's what the everything is really about at the moment. But there's also something else that also comes up is, growing up, I think a lot of us kind of miss out the idea that there's also, racial biases that we are raised with, right? Like I remember if I was to give an example about myself personally, I'm originally from Afghanistan. I migrated here, but there's also this notion of institutionalized racism. And the way that occurs is that, from the day we are born, I think this happens to a lot of us. Some of us are conscious of knowing, that institutional racism doesn't exist within our own communities too, right? Like somebody like myself, being from the Afghan community, there's racism that I've seen, within my own household, right? Number one, I'm born in a household where I'm taught, you got to do better than this individual in the family, right? Which is pretty commonly known. But then you have certain things that, if you go out and you go swimming, right? Oh, don't go out, you're going to get dark. Like, those are small little perks that are used, but those are small things that get embedded in your mindset or in your head where you're like, oh, no, it's bad if I was getting dark. Somebody's going to talk down upon me. I can't hang out with a group of, individuals because they're from a certain background. I know there's a big debate in Afghanistan, or in certain, and this doesn't happen in my community where Afghans, like for instance, they have the battle of different ethnic sects. Like we are better, we're a better tribe than you are. We are a better race than you are, and that happens. And that's something that I always I go out and I talk about. But that maybe that happens in every institution and community, but the problem usually comes about is that nobody really addresses it, right? So we're always kind of holding this notion that, Black Lives Matter, it is important, but also kind of talk about, and this is where you come in and you're going to talk about the Islamic perspective of every single one of us or people that have been raised in a household, people are racist and in some parts or ways. It's just fact or reality. It's called institutionalized racism, which a lot of us don't acknowledge, right? But there, we do it for fun. We do it to, we started when we were young teenagers. We've done it. I've done it. But we don't realize that eventually that really kind of catches up at times of what's taking place today. But how can we as a community kind of come together now and really discuss the importance of how, through the principles of Tawhid, how can Islam successfully loosen the societal expectations by allowing all people really the opportunity to participate in a greater society and practice their rights, right? That's the goal. Before we get going, there's one other thing, a perfect example, right? Because I like to give myself an example so people don't feel as if I'm attacking them personally, or people of different communities, or the African American community doesn't think that I'm going against them, right? So my personal experience that if I share with anybody would be, I've had family members who have married outside of outside of the sect, right, the Afghan community, but they married with Muslims, right? They married with Muslim folks, but even the fact that they have married folks from a different country that are Muslim, well practicing Muslims, I still have certain family members who actually look really down upon them, right? That is something that is institutionalized from the very beginning of time, from, like, let's say, from my family, that was taught to us not to marry somebody from your outside of your sect. So that's a problem, right? That's a problem that becomes problematic for us, because we don't realize that there are benefits, cultural benefits that come to it, but I think we miss the idea that sometimes we push the limits of that cultural limitations, that we cross the religious line as well. For that, thank you so much, Sheikh Tariq Atta. So please continue with our discussion today.
Of course. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. A very important topic, and the whole notion of racism, or the notion that certain people are superior to others, is not a new phenomenon. In fact, you could probably trace it back to the children of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam himself. The issue of Qabil and Habil. And there are various narrations as to what the feud between these two brothers was. And one opinion states that it was an issue over a girl. Qabil was married to a girl who he perceived was less beautiful than the wife of Habil, of Abel. So that's what happened. And it said that one branch of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam's children, the women were beautiful, and the other branch, it was the men who were beautiful. And from that, you find these tensions between societies and different cultures and ethnicities begin. And even Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, this is one of the things he challenged as a prophet. And the elites, and underline this word, underline this group of people, the elites, because racism comes from these people. The elites accused Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam and tried to argue against him, saying that those who follow you are the inferior of society, inferior in terms of their mental capacities or their intelligence. And they did that. And you find that throughout human history. Sometimes it's very clear and very aggressive. Other times it's not as clear and as aggressive. So what's the solution? Islam came and solved that problem. But before I get into the specifics, I actually want to read a very profound letter, the letter of Malcolm X when he was in Hajj. And I'm going to read it in its entirety. And in his letter, when we, maybe most of us have heard or read this letter, and the general idea we get from it is that Islam destroys or abolishes racism, and that's true. However, when you really read what he's saying and you begin to understand the philosophies of Islam, and you have that amount of knowledge, you'll understand that Malcolm X not only realized that Islam is a solution to racism, he understood why it is and how it resolves race tensions. So I'm going to read the letter in its entirety. So Malcolm X, rahimahullah ta'ala, Malik al-Shabazz, says, "Never have I witnessed such sincere hospitality and overwhelming spirit of true brotherhood as is practiced by the people of all colors and races here in the ancient Holy Land, the home of Abraham, Muhammad, and all the other prophets of the Holy Scriptures. For the past week, I have been utterly speechless and spellbound by the graciousness I see displayed all around me by people of all colors. I have been blessed to visit the holy city of Mecca. I have made my 7 circuits around the Kaaba, led by a young mutawaf named Muhammad. I drank from the water from the well of the Zamzam. I drank water from the well of the Zamzam. I ran 7 times back and forth between the hills of Mount As-Safa and Al-Marwa. I have prayed in the ancient city of Mina, and I have prayed on Mount Arafah. There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all around the world. They were of all colors, from the blue-eyed blondes to the black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and non-white. America needs to understand Islam, because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met, talked to, and even eaten with people who in America would have been considered white, but the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam. I have never before seen sincere and true brotherhood practiced by all colors together, irrespective of their color. You may be shocked by the words coming from me, but on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held, and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This was not too difficult for me. Despite my firm convictions, I have always been a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and new knowledge unfolds it. I have always kept an open mind, which is necessary to the flexibility that must go hand in hand with every form of intelligent search for truth. During the past 11 days here in the Muslim world, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept on the same rug, while praying to the same God with fellow Muslims, whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And in the words and in the deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among the black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. We were truly all the same brothers, because their belief in one God had removed the white from their minds, the white from their behavior, and the white from their attitude. I could see from this that perhaps if white Americans could accept the oneness of God, then perhaps, too, they could accept in reality the oneness of man, and cease to measure and hinder and harm others in terms of their differences in color. With racism plaguing America like an incurable cancer, the so-called Christian white American heart should be more receptive to a proven solution to such a destructive problem. Perhaps it could be in time to save America from imminent disaster, the same destruction brought upon Germany by racism that eventually destroyed the Germans themselves. Each hour here in the Holy Land enables me to have greater spiritual insights into what is happening in America between black and white. The American Negro never can be blamed for his racial animosities. He is only reacting to 400 years of conscious racism of the American whites. But as racism leads America up the suicide path, I do believe from the experiences that I have had with them, with the whites of the younger generation in the colleges and universities, will see the handwriting on the walls, and many of them will turn to the spiritual path of truth. The only way left to America to ward off the disaster that racism inevitably must lead to. Never have I been so highly honored. Never have I been made to feel more humble and unworthy. Who would believe the blessings that have been heaped upon an American Negro? A few nights ago, a man who would be called in America a white man, a United Nations diplomat, an ambassador, a companion of kings, gave me his hotel suite, his bed. Never would I have even thought of dreaming that I would ever be a recipient of such honors that in America would be bestowed upon a king, not a Negro. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Sincerely, Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz Malcolm X, rahimahullah ta'ala. There are many things that we can point to in the letter of Malcolm X. But when we look at this, there are two things I want to highlight and then build off that depending on how much time is left. I want us to focus on the following quote in his letter. He said that his experiences in Mecca, and I quote, has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This is where Tawhid begins to reform the society. It doesn't begin with society itself. It doesn't begin by restructuring the social structures. Rather, it begins by reframing the mind right here. Because although it is the system that is put into play by the elites who profit off racism, who benefit off racism and lock themselves in their elitism through racism, by excluding parts of society, by dividing society so that whenever society turns to them and begins to accuse them that they are the problems, that they are the ones causing the problems of society. Instead of the white Americans living in rural America who complain and are frustrated by their financial situations, by their crumbling infrastructure, by their exclusion to greater American society, instead of the whites of rural America blaming the rich billionaires who Bernie Sanders and Noam Chomsky have been pointing to for the past 4 decades, instead of pointing to them, or when they begin to point to the elites, like our President Trump, will say, no, it's not our fault. Look at the Mexicans. They're coming through our borders and they're bringing drugs and they're rapists, etc. It's the black people. It's the Muslims who are bringing terrorism. And essentially they divert the attention from the true cause of the problem to other people who are victims, who are the same victims of these white who the white rural Americans and these minorities, they're both the victims of the same group, and those are the elites. Islam begins to deconstruct structured racism by reframing the mind right here. And you see this in the Quran, especially in the Medinan chapters. In fact, throughout the Quran, you see how Islam deconstructs aggressive and unhealthy family and tribal bonds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ إِن كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وإخوانكم وأزواجكم وعشيرتكم وأموال اقترفتموها وتجارة تخشون كسادها ومساكن ترضونها. Say, if your fathers and your children and your tribes and your wives and your homes and your businesses are more beloved, أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله, are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger, فَتَرَبَّصُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ, then wait for a calamity to come. You see, Islam comes and begins to reframe the mind by doing something very, very important, but very simple. Islam comes and says Allah is in charge. Allah is the greatest authority. Allah is the one who dictates the terms of human interactions. He is the one who tells us what's right. And He is the one who tells us what's wrong. He is the one who tells us what is truth and what is falsehood, what is correct and what is incorrect, what is healthy and what is unhealthy. Why? So that these things aren't usurped by human beings who will then use it for self-gain. You see, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, racism is not just feelings. It's a thought process. It's a system, as researchers point to. Even if the civil rights movement of the 60s was successful in changing many laws, the structure that was placed prior to that was so impactful that it restructured the minds of Americans to view blacks in a racist way, even if the structure is no longer racist. And it still is. Not as much as pre-60s, pre-civil rights, the civil rights movement, but it still is. You see what it did? When you look at media, blacks are portrayed as gangsters, thugs, killers, drug addicts. And that's the perception of the average American, even if they're immigrants. That black people cannot be trusted. They are lazy. Stereotypes. That necessarily isn't coming from the government of America. but it's coming from the elites who fund and make these movies and make this culture and portray the culture. It comes from the zoning laws, the laws that are placed on inner cities to keep them crumbling, to keep the education there poor, to keep the society there almost lawless. Look at the research, look at the statistics. Many of the elite educational organizations, like Pearson and other things, make billions of dollars and allocate millions of dollars into lobbying to keep the educational system in a certain way, part of which keeps certain minorities inferior in education. Look at the system, the prison system. It profits $70 billion a year. How? Because private companies are the ones who build these structures, build the prisons, and then rent it out to the government. So the government is paying private institutions, private companies for these facilities and for security, for example, etc. And the prison system makes $70 billion. And the longer these inmates remain in prison, and inmates in America are primarily Black and Latino, the longer they stay in there, the more profit that they make. And they allocate millions of dollars in lobbying or for lobbying in order to keep the system. The elites aren't necessarily the congressman or the senator. The congressman and the senator have become slaves to the billionaires. That's the reality. How do we fight against this? We do it the way every prophet did it. You see, look at the story of Nuh, look at the story of Hud and Saleh and Lut and Ibrahim and Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam and Shu'aib. There's something common in all of their stories. The Mala', the elites, the battle between the prophets and the enemies of Allah and the enemies of the prophets are always the elites. And Allah keeps pointing to this over 50 times in the Quran. Allah uses this word Mala'. قال الملأ, the elites are the enemies, not only of Allah, not only of revelation, not only of the prophets, they are enemies to humanity. Why? Because they profit off dividing society. They profit off racism. They push back against truth. They push back against systems that empower mankind, that bring justice and fairness, that include everyone rather than exclude. And all of this starts with the message of every single prophet. U'budullah ma lakum min ilahin ghayruh. Worship Allah. You have no Lord besides Him. So Malcolm X noticed, he recognized that the success of Islam's success in deconstructing racism, a human problem from the beginning of mankind, came from Islam's ability to change the mindset of mankind, to reframe their mind, to view the world in a different way, through the lens of Tawhid, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that He is in charge. He is the authority. So the second quote here I'd like to mention, Malcolm X says, further elaborating on the first point, and I quote, I could see from this that perhaps if white Americans could accept what? The oneness of God, Tawhid, then perhaps too they can accept in reality the oneness of mankind. In order for mankind to be united, they need to unite under the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because when we look to Allah as the authority, what Allah and the Quran does, what Allah does through the Quran and through the messengers is define who we are. Our identity becomes defined by Allah, the greatest authority, and is no longer capable of being usurped by elites who will profit from it. When you look at the Quran, and I have been repeating this for many months now, the issue of identity is an important, critical, crucial, fundamental part of understanding who we are. of building society, of building government. Islam in the Quran, Allah in the Quran gives us two identities. That's it. Number one, and this is in no order. Number one, first, we are human beings. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah has given nobility to the children of Adam. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ. We are the ones who created you. لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيْ. Allah says, I have created human beings with my two hands, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the one who created us. Our first definition, our first identity is a human being. And when we view the world, when we view humanity from this identity, that we are human beings, there is something very valuable to that. And that is, every single human is a human being. And now we link every single human being to Allah. Every human being is a creation, a product of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the greatest authority. Allah has rights over us. And as our creator, as our Lord, He is the one who protects us. He is the one who gave us our rights. He is the one who gave us our dignity. And therefore, anyone who tries to usurp that, tries to change it, tries to transgress it, essentially they are transgressing the boundaries of Allah, not of another mankind. When we view our identity as being the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no one can come and claim that they are the ones who created that. No one can come and take that away from us. That is a God-given right to each and every one of us. And when we do that, we take this capability away from the elite who can then profit from it, who can then use it against us, who can then oppress and marginalize and exclude a part of society in order to keep them as the elites and the superiors. When we view ourselves as a creation, a product of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, essentially we make ourselves and we make everyone else independent of other human beings, independent from being defined by other human beings. We become immune to the definitions of other people who will then use it for their own self-gain. The second identity the Quran gives us is the religious one. We are Muslims. And what that means is La ilaha illallah. We submit to the oneness of Allah. We submit to the principle that none is worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, although this is a group, a sector of human society, what that does, however, when we say our identity goes back to our relationship with Allah, we remember that Allah does not exclude anyone from that possibility. Allah does not put conditions upon us where only certain people can be Muslim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not say, in order to be Muslim, you need to be of a certain eye color, or a certain skin color, or hair color, or gender, or age, or ethnicity, or race. Rather, Islam is universal, capable of incorporating anyone and everyone. And the only condition to be part of this society, of this group, is to say La ilaha illallah. And anyone and everyone has access to that. Anyone and everyone can say and believe La ilaha illallah. This is what Malcolm X recognized, rahmatullah alayh. He realized what is bonding all of these Muslims, what made them capable of seeing beyond the colors, beyond the ethnicities, is the fact that they were under a greater authority, not a human authority. They were under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they were doing what Allah told them to do. And they were following the most just man and the most just individuals of mankind, the Prophet ﷺ and the prophets, who came and battled social oppression, who came and reformed society through theology, So when you look at Tawheed, Tawheed has the ability of removing human authorities and placing the authority in someone we can all agree upon is worthy of that authority, who we can all agree upon is worthy of submitting to, of worthy of being the most just, capable of doing that. And that is Allah. So when we say La ilaha illallah, when we study Islam, when we look at the principles and the guidelines and the jurisprudence provided to us through the Quran and the tradition of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, essentially what it does, it starts reframing the way we view ourselves, we view others, and we view the world itself, to where we view the lens as being through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah does not give superiority to anyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not exclusive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not difficult to engage. And therefore, anyone can be a muwahhid. And anyone who is a muwahhid, a monotheist, has placed themselves under the guardianship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anyone who tries to challenge that, tries to transgress it, is challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does the Prophet ﷺ narrate in a hadith Qudsi, in a sacred hadith? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Man adha li waliyan faqad barastuhu fil harb." Whoever harms a friend of mine, whoever harms someone who is under my guardianship, then I have proclaimed, announced war against them. Because someone who does that is saying Allah made something wrong. Allah did something wrong. Because in the end, it is Allah who not only chose for us the color of our skin, the color of our eyes, our ethnicity, our race, and our gender. Not only is He the one who chose that, He is also the one who praises Himself for doing that. He is the one who created us black and brown and white, blonde and brunette, blue-eyed and brown-eyed. He is the one who created us that way in a multitude of variation. And all of that, Allah says that in this diversity is a sign of Allah's capability, is a sign in Allah's worthiness of being worshipped. And Allah praises Himself for that. And very briefly, there are other things Tawheed does for us. And that is, Tawheed places our loyalty in Allah and not in man-made systems. Directs our fear and our hope in Allah or with Allah instead of in man-made systems. The more Tawheed we have in our hearts, the more our body adheres to Tawheed, the more our mind is affected by Tawheed, the more human structures, human definitions, human isms become irrelevant to us. And the more we do that, the more we free ourselves from the shackles of these criminals who seek to enslave us for their own personal gain. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to let us follow, understand what Malcolm X was saying, to help us experience that. And remember, Hajj is a statement of Tawheed. It's done every year to proclaim Tawheed to the world, to let the world know our identity as Muslims is La ilaha illallah, that none is worthy of worship except Allah. Tawheed is a statement of who we are, and it's also evidence, as Malcolm X says, a proven solution to the problems of mankind. And it is an open proclamation against those who try and oppress people. Remember this, it is about Tawheed. And the more we as Muslims live by Tawheed, learn about Tawheed, allow Tawheed to structure our lives and our minds and our hearts, allow it to impact our behaviors, the more we free ourselves, the more we are capable of freeing other things, and the more we are able to do away with these oppressors. It is about Tawheed. The success of all the prophets, the success of the companions, and the success of any Muslim goes back to their ability to apply Tawhid in their lives. We are Muslims, and Allah bears witness that none is worthy of worship except Him. And we bear witness that none is worthy of worship except Him. The Prophet ﷺ and all the prophets lived their lives, sacrificed it all, spent every moment promoting this statement, because this is true justice. And no, anything that contradicts Tawheed, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna shirk la dhulmun azim. Shirk, what is antithetical to Islam, what is contradictory, opposite to Tawheed, know that shirk is the greatest injustice. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course,
Again, we want to thank you for this beautiful message, community message that you gave us, pertaining to Tawheed. And it was very beautifully said too, and how you took it back, that it's ideology and it's something that's embedded in us from earlier times on. As Muslims, we'll try to, we try to practice and we try to do what we can to better ourselves and to gain as much knowledge as we can from our beloved sheikhs like yourself. So exactly. We want to thank you very much on behalf of the Islamic Shura Council again. And myself, thank you very much, and Jummah Mubarak to you.
Exactly. Jummah Mubarak to each and every one of you. Thank you for the opportunity, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept any good that was said that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His tawfiq, and anything incorrect, and that is the fault of myself and the fault of the shaitan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.